Hey guys, you're listening to episode 126 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother, Keelan. Today, we're talking to speaker and author Brian Kluth. Brian has been intimately involved in the generosity space for over 40 years and has thought deeply about how to effectively communicate the joy and adventure that is to be had in the generous life. He is overflowing with stories of generosity and risky faith. Stay tuned to hear all he has to share. Before we get started, we've spent years speaking to and learning from some of the most passionate givers and leaders in the world. We've distilled down some of the most impactful frameworks, strategies, and tools into short weekly emails that leave you with practical ways you can take your generosity journey to the next level. If you're not on the list already, you can sign up for free at finishlinepledge.com. With that, let's get started. Well, we're thrilled to have Brian Kluth joining us today. Brian, thanks so much for giving us some of your time.
Hey, great to be with you and your listeners, and we really want to encourage them today. So I'm looking forward to a great time together.
So Brian, can you start us off today? Just tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your faith background as well.
Yeah, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My father was a fireman and ultimately a fire chief. So kind of a blue collar, growing up experience. Active going to church, but did not know Christ at all. Went to a very liberal church. They didn't even really preach from the Bible. I don't even know what they preached from. But anyway, did not come to know Christ until I was 20 years old as a university student at the University of Wisconsin. And growing up, I was very greedy for money and the things that money could buy. And when I was actually in my teens, I was even stealing from my employers, money from them, some of their products. And it was interesting, when I became a Christian, the Lord convicted me of the wrong I had done. And I went back to all my employers and I made biblical restitution, which means you pay for everything you took and then you add 20% on top of it. And what that does is, for someone that is a thief like I was, you're a thief because you think, oh, I'm going to get something for nothing. But when you realize you're going to have to go confess it and pay for it and give 20% on top, it completely cures you from ever wanting to steal ever again. So I got very cured very quickly when I became a Christian. And then the Lord gave me a verse, Ephesians 4:28. Let him who steals steal no more, but let him work with his hands and give to those in need. And over my lifetime, I've had the privilege of using my hands, my life, to identify needs in this world and to be involved in helping bring a solution or a help to those needs. So it's been a real journey of grace, and I'm so grateful that God radically saved me when I was 20 years old.
So Brian, I know that generosity has been a passion and an area of ministry in your life for quite a long time. Where were the seeds of generosity planted in your life?
Yeah, it really came when I was working for an advertising agency. I was in my probably 22, 23. And one day I went to my church and they had this cassette library of different speakers. And you could check out speakers and preachers and so forth. And I came across this thing and it said, Christian Financial Concepts. And I was like, well, what is that? Because I couldn't put the word Christian and finances together. I didn't know what that was or what that was about. So I started listening to these tapes, these cassettes. Tells you how old I am, right? With a cassette. But anyway, it was Larry Burkett. And Christian Financial Concepts is now Crown Financial Ministries. But anyway, when I listened to Larry, it revolutionized everything I thought about money, about debt, about giving, about living, about provisions, everything. So that really powerfully impacted me. So I then went through all of their workshops to become a budget workshop leader and teacher. I went through their debt counseling training. I, started speaking at churches in my 20s. And what was fascinating was I would do the template of what they did. But wherever I went, people, when I would talk about generosity and giving, the light bulb would go on for people. And people would say to me, Brian, that was great, budget teaching and financial teaching and all that. But when you talked about giving, something happened inside of me. And, guys, I don't understand it fully myself, but people, even in their 80s, would say, Brian, when you talked about generosity and giving, there was something inside of me like I've never felt before, I've never heard before, I've never understood before. And when you talk about generosity, it just grabbed our hearts. So I knew in my 20s that there was something in my testimony and my life message and in my story that for some reason God took my materialistic, selfish, stealing lifestyle. The Bible says out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. That word innermost being means black hole. Out of my black hole of selfishness and materialism and all of that, God began to bring out rivers of living water. And those rivers of living water have always been associated with generosity. And, I remember one millionaire, he heard me speaking one day and he goes, "Hey, Brian," he said, "giving is my last thought. I never think about giving. But after I heard you today, my life and my living and my giving will never be the same. It will now be my first thought." So for some reason in the providence of God, that's something he put into my life and into my ministry, and been doing it for over 40 years.
So there's so much I want to get into just from what you've shared already. I'm curious, while we're still kind of on the early years, were there any experiences you had early on? Obviously, you shared about Larry Burkett, but were there any kind of experiences either through kind of trial and error in your own life and kind of feeling out how generosity works, or through others that really solidified your understanding of generosity and really formalized that for you?
Yeah, I think early on, so go back into my 20s, I was a new Christian, right? Now I was an honest person. I was working and behaving myself, right? And living for the Lord. But I still wasn't smart with finances. And, I used to spend money I didn't have to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like. So I soon found myself in debt. And then the Larry Burkett stuff really came in and helped me really get out of that. But in that journey, one day I remember very specifically, I had my check and my check was small and I had a big pile of bills and I'm like, I can't even pay my bills. And it's like the Spirit of God said, "Brian, trust me." And I'm like, "God, I am trusting you." "No, Brian, trust me. Honor me. Thank me." "Lord, for what?" "For the paycheck you have." "But Lord, it's not big enough." "No, thank me, trust me, honor me." And just the number 10% came in my mind. I was like, that's crazy. I can't do that. I was very fearful of it. But I just Lord was like, "Brian, honor me, trust me." And I remember with a shaking hand, literally my hand was shaking. I'm like, "Okay, God, I don't understand this. I don't get this. I don't know how this is going to work. But whenever I get paid, whenever I'm going to make the first check to you, and then you give me the wisdom on what to do with the rest of my life," right? So that happened. And what I discovered is when people don't give, they often don't give because they do the math. I just have enough or I don't have enough. And if I give anything away, I'll have less. But what I discovered is generosity is God's crazy mathematics. When you honor God, you are inviting him into your financial life. And he gives you more. He gives you more wisdom. He gives you more contentment. He gives you more creative provisions. He's God, and he helps you in ways that you can't even imagine. So very early on, I had to learn that when it came to giving, I had to push past my fear and operate in faith and say, "Okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to thank you. And I'm going to honor you with whatever you give me." So that was a pretty significant time. And maybe I was like 23, 24.
So Brian, you mentioned you've been in this ministry space for over 40 years. How has your understanding of generosity evolved over that time?
Well, I think what has happened for me is it's really become simplified. When I look at, well, what does it take to help people become generous? There are very, very basic things that have to happen. And I've been involved with helping people think through that on a global perspective. It's one thing to think about it from an American perspective, but when you're trying to come up with biblical truth for generosity for the world, for every person on planet Earth, for every Christian anywhere at any income level, you've really got to get it down to some very, very simple and core components or keys, biblical keys, that anybody on the planet could say, "Yes, God, with your help, I'm going to do these things." And in my case, we were talking a little earlier before we got in the program, I developed a generosity pledge, a 7-point generosity pledge. Developed it a number of years ago, but for a variety of reasons, now it's coming forward as far as something that may go global. And it's just it's 7 simple keys that anyone on the planet could say, yes, God, with your help, I will do these things.
So I'm curious, you have a lot more experience than most in trying to share the message of generosity. And I think you've probably done that in many different ways, many iterations over the years. What have you found effective in really communicating that message in a way that really sinks in, where you see that light bulb click on, like happened when you heard that first cassette tape?
Yeah. So I'm going to just kind of go walk you through the 7 things from the Generosity Pledge, because I think it'll make it a little clearer what we're talking about here. They ultimately there are 7 S's. And the first one is submit yourself and all you have to the Lord. Generosity doesn't start with an amount. It doesn't start with a percentage. It starts with you being all in for God. So you've got to come to that place of submitting yourself to God, what you have, who you are, and even a point of surrender, right? Number 2, and this is really key, you have to study the scriptures on finances and generosity. Most Christians do not know that the Bible is full of truth that they've never been told or taught, even in their own churches. So I've developed some materials that can help them easily do that. But what are the scriptures on finances and generosity? That's what Larry Burkett did for me. When he opened up the scriptures, that's when my whole life changed. So you have to, 2, study the scriptures on finances and generosity. 3 is you need to learn to see what God has given you, your paycheck, your skills, your possessions. Really get a clue and get plugged in. Sometimes people worry about what they don't have, but God's call is, what do you have? What have I given you? And how do you be faithful with that, right? Faithful in little, faithful in much. Number 4 is probably the most life-changing thing that anybody can do, and that is set aside money in a giving account that you will give from. So you separate what you live on and what you give on. And when you do that, that's when it all changes. When you don't commingle your living and giving, when you literally have a place, and that's where like National Christian Foundation, donor advised funds, those are great tools, but even a separate account on your phone app for your bank, or a place in your bookkeeping or something, but where you're tracking, you're putting money aside to give with. That's really, really transformational. And then number 5 is systematically give to thank and honor God for what he's given you. So everything that comes into your life, you do that. You use your head and you figure out your percentages and your amounts and where you're going to give, and you do that. Number 6 is you spontaneously give as God prompts your heart. That's different than systematic giving. I mean, God has prompted me to give cars away. God has prompted me to give large amounts of money away. God's prompted me to give groceries to people, or to help a single mom, or to give someone a free place to live. It had nothing to do with systematic giving or a tithe or anything. It was God, the owner of everything I have, said, Brian, I want you to give this. So you learn to say, yes, God, I'll give whatever you prompt me to give. And then number 7 is sacrificially give to show your devotion to God. This is where you're really typically going into areas of wealth, accumulated wealth, or things of value, where you are letting go of something that has real value to you or could to your family. And you say, God, I want to honor you. I want to honor you with that. And when someone does those 7 things, they will be living a life of generosity. I mean, that's what the Generosity Pledge is. And it's very transformative when people kind of like, oh, yeah, I get it. And when I teach on this at conferences and churches and events, I literally teach on it, and then people say it out loud together. That's kind of cool. We will, or I will, and then go through the 7 things. And then they sign the pledge card, and then they have it witnessed. And then when they go home, we say, use one of my free Bible devotionals. Your next step after signing the card is now go into the Word. And let God take his Word and water those seeds through his Word that you made in that commitment. And it just brings real transformation to families and to individuals and to couples.
A couple things that really stand out that you just walked through there, just in the course of hearing so many stories of generosity through this podcast and just over the last 4 or 5 years, I've come to an understanding that there is not a correct way to express generosity, but instead God allows incredible creativity in how we express generosity, and through which means we choose to do so. So you put systematically right next to spontaneously, and those can sound like opposites. but they are right there next to each other alongside surrender and sacrifice. And I think it's a very holistic picture of the transformation that occurs when you step into generosity.
Yeah, I think very much so. Because I was someone recently, the couple in front of me were talking about their giving. And the wife said, well, I want to be a little more spontaneous. And the guy's like, we tithe. You could be spontaneous with any amount in that tithe that you want. Okay. And it was fascinating because I was like, you can be a faithful tither and never become a generous person. Because like this guy was locked into his systematic giving. There was no place for spontaneous. There was no place for sacrificial. It was like, nope, I'm paying my tithe bill and that's what we've got. So there's a real place to say, no, in the Bible, there is systematic giving. That's tithes, right? There is spontaneous. That's all over the scripture. And there is sacrificial. So the Bible really has 3 layers of generosity that in our lifetime, we are to be experiencing all of those, not just one of those.
And the other thing that really stands out is you said separate, which really resonates with me, and I'm sure Keelan and anybody who's set a financial finish line. That's really part of the process, is not just to mentally separate this concept of ownership. It's like establishing it correctly. It's not, hey, everything's in a bank account with my name on it, and I'm going to figure out what to give to God out of that. It flips it on its head. This is all God's money, and I want to manage all of it wisely, and some of it I'm going to use to live on. But to manage your giving separately, why is that significant in allowing people to step into a life of generosity?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, let's say a giving opportunity comes along. It doesn't matter, missions, a building project at your church, some family has a need, a single mom, there's an opportunity comes, right? So the opportunity is presented and you're like, oh, we got to pay for our groceries. Oh, we got to pay our bills, right? There's almost a tight fistedness that happens immediately. The opportunity comes to give, but you're like, no, we're all committed. So we can't. But what's really cool is when you have a plan to set aside, and I can talk about how we do that and how I teach people to do that. When you set aside money, and I believe it's to be done on a weekly basis, when you put money in some kind of a giving account or a giving place, once it is over there, it's just waiting for God to lead you. So let's say that opportunity comes to help somebody. So with my wife and I, we look at each other and we say, well, do we want to give? And she'll say, yeah, I think we do. And I say to her, what's your number? And she says, well, what's your number? And it's fascinating. The number could be $50. It could be $500, $1,000. Sometimes it's been $5,000, $10,000, right? Doesn't matter, but we have the same number. But the money's sitting there. There's no like, oh, can we get, what about groceries? What about vacation? What about our bills? What about the mortgage? There's not, we never even think about that because the money's sitting there waiting to be given. We just need the opportunity in the Spirit of God to unite our hearts. So it's really a beautiful way to give. And so you can give with joy. You really can give with joy constantly because the money's set aside. And the way we do it is we use 1 Corinthians 16:2. On the first day of each week, let each of you give or set aside money to give according to how God has blessed you or provided for you. So we literally send ourselves an email, or years ago, I used to have a notebook, and we ask one question on Sunday night. God, how did you provide the last 7 days? How did you provide? And we answer that question, and we write down everything we can think of. So just this week, right? This week in the Kluth family, we have an Airbnb and there was a problem with an issue and they were going to charge us an extra $550, right? That's money out the door, $550 on this Airbnb thing. And I reached out to customer service and they said, nope, we can't help you. You got to pay the $550. And then another person randomly got back to me and then said, oh, we made a decision to waive the $550. Okay. So that's a financial blessing that we're going to write down. My wife took a ring to a jeweler to have something done, and the guy quoted her $250. She came back a couple of days later with the ring, and he said, oh, I'm so sorry. He said, I misquoted you. It's really $500. And she said, but you told me $550. And he said, you know what? You're right. I'm going to honor my $250. So we're going to write down the $500. We're going to write down the $250 savings And then we also just booked some flights to Africa, frequent flyers. They would have been thousands and thousands of dollars. We got them all frequent flyers, so it's worth $4,000. We're going to write it down. And then we add up the value and we take at least a tenth of the blessings and we put that into our giving account. And we have an NCF account, donor advice fund, but we also have a separate checkbook in our bank accounts. So I just literally do a transfer into Chase Bank and I put that money aside. And then it's just there to give. And we give it freely and with joy because we give it out of thankfulness for what God did.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with that. And one of the things that I've seen is that when that money is set aside, when you've already kind of made the mental decision about it, the sacrifice, if you want to call it that even, but it's the division, it actually really heightens your sensitivity to the Spirit.
Yes.
Because when you have not made that differentiation, it's almost like a part of your brain is trying to quiet those little promptings that you kind of get throughout the week or whatever. Because you're like, I don't even want to deal with that right now. You got other stuff I got to focus on. I know bills coming in or whatever. When it's already set aside, there's like a back piece of your brain that's kind of just listening all the time. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, tell me where to use it. And you're just like waiting for it. And when it comes up, you can recognize it so clearly.
Yeah, Keenan, that's a really good thought. And yeah, there's just so much freedom in this when you really do separate it out. Even in the Old Testament, they would literally count the sheep and every, the 10th one goes over here or the first one goes over here. They separated it out. And when you do the separation, that is where the freedom comes because it's wholly unto God. You don't ever touch it again, right? You only touch it to release it. You don't go and say, oh, I'm going to go borrow from that. Once it's set aside unto God, it's wholly unto the Lord. And then God has to show you where he wants you to give it. And then there's real joy in the journey. When I married my wife, I'm widowed, and my first wife went to heaven in 2010. And I married my second wife. She was selling her house, and she was going to move into my house. We were going to move there for a couple of years, let my son graduate from high school, and then get our house. But anyway, I said, hey, honey, you're selling your house. You're going to get to give a lot of money. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, you're going to sell your house, you're going to pay off your mortgage, and you're going to get this 6-figure check. And she said, yeah. And I said, so on Sunday night, when we count our blessings, we'll write down the $150,000 check you got. And she's like, what? And I'm like, well, yeah, we'll write it down, and then we can kind of put money into the giving account. And she's like, well, but that's like $15,000. I said, isn't that cool? And she's like, well, do we have to do that? I said, oh, no, we don't have to do that. We get to do that. And anyway, she's like, well, I've never even heard of that. And I said, well, you pray about it, you think about it, but it was your house. And on Sunday night, you make the decision. And when we got together, she said, let's do it. So we wrote down that we got a $150,000 check, and we, put $15,000 over into the giving account. And just a few weeks later, she wanted to help some missionary. Can we help him? And I'm like, what's your number? And she gave me her number, and it was my number. And, she's like, this is so cool. But it was all because there was a plan to set it aside. That's where the joy came.
Yeah, now we kind of briefly touched on this a little earlier, but, we love talking about finish lines. And I think you have some experience with finish lines over the years as well. I'd love to hear some of what that's looked like for you guys.
Yeah, the most significant one, I'm probably in my early 40s. I went to one of the early generous giving conferences, and one of the fellows there told the story of he made $50,000 a year. He met Dr. Bright, and Dr. Bright challenged him to give $50,000 a year. And the guy's like, well, Dr. Bright, I only make $50,000 a year. And then Dr. Bright's like, well, just trust God for it. See if God will help you. And anyway, he and his wife went back home, and they decided to make that a goal to give $50,000 that next year. So what they decided is they would live on $50,000 and then give everything beyond that to the Lord. And the Lord did some amazing things, and they got through the first year and they gave $50,000. So the second year they said, okay, let's keep our living at $50,000 and make, let's give $100,000 this year or something. And a lot of things happened, but they were able to give $100,000. And I think it was 6 or 7 years they lived at $50,000. In 6-7 years, they gave $1 million. Right. So I was so moved by that story. I went home to my wife. I said, honey, I think we should do the same thing. And at the time I was probably making over $100,000. She said, okay, let's do it. So we opened two checking accounts. We had our living and checking account and our giving checking account. I said, we'll take money and we'll put 50,000 in our living checking account, and anything else goes to the giving account. Doesn't matter to us how much it is, whatever it is, God will show us. So we did that for a year, and we gave probably 50, 60,000 that year. But then what happened was God called me to be a pastor at 45. And I said yes to the opportunity to leave I had a CEO position, said yes to the opportunity and became a pastor. And when I got there, the salary was 50,000. So God gave us a year of prepping to live on 50,000. We thought we were going to be able to give $1 million away. But what he was doing was he was preparing us to live at that level. And we just did that for a number of years. We intentionally kept our lifestyle capped and then gave above it. And then even I made quite a bit of money with some books and materials I've written, 7-figure kind of stuff. And we just continue to keep at that time we were maybe 60, 70,000, but we were giving into the 6-figure range every year. And we were content, we were happy, and we had a lot of joy in our generosity. So it was pretty cool.
Brian, I think it's so cool that although you are expecting to give in a financial sense, God invited you into an opportunity to give in a variety of different ways throughout that season of your life. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, if you had not capped your lifestyle and separated your finances, how would your decision-making process about becoming a pastor have looked different?
Well, one, I would have just immediately said it's impossible. If I would have, let's just stayed at my 120,000 level at that time, 20 some years ago. And then someone comes along and says, hey, we'd like you to be our pastor and we can pay you 50,000. I mean, there wouldn't even be a conversation, right? I mean, I had 3 kids, and my kids were at the time, the kids are, I think, 4, 6, and 8. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to leave my position and go become a pastor and take a $70,000 pay cut. But because we had already lived that experience and we were doing fine, it was interesting with the church. I never even asked them what the salary was. So I went through the whole candidating process because I had never prepared to be a pastor and had not gone to seminary. So this was a God move, right? That they were even considering me. But I went through the whole candidating process. They called me to become the pastor. And then they said, we should probably tell you what the salary is. And I said, okay, before you tell me what the salary is, let me tell you a story. I said, a year ago, God had us change our lifestyle to live on $50,000 a year. Now you go ahead and tell me what the salary is. And they said 50,000. I said, we're good. So it was just a God journey. And I had a wonderful, wonderful 10 years of being the pastor at that church in Colorado Springs. And the Lord blessed that time. And yeah, that was a very special time in my life. But it was all God, right? God orchestrated all of that. And it was all flowed out of a lifestyle of generosity is how that all flowed.
So I love that story because I think it really accurately captures the full breadth of what's possible with Finish Line. So when people first hear about the concept of a finish line, I think it's easy to only see limits, right? That this is putting limits on my capacity and what I can do and stuff. But really, it adds a huge degree of freedom.
Yeah.
And even in like that couple that inspired you, they set their finish line at where they were. They didn't even know it was going to happen. And they didn't cut their income in half. They just said, we're done expanding from where we're at. And then with those crazy circumstances, it just multiplied beyond that. And when I first set my own finish line, I was really just thinking in a financial standpoint of like, okay, so God's going to have me give. And so we'll figure out what that looks like. But in my own life and in now so many other people's lives who I've heard stories from, it actually frees up so much of your life. Because, without something like that, some kind of a guardrail or limit of some sense, we just tend to live at max capacity. It's like our default state. And unless you kind of intentionally do something to counteract that, then it's a lot like the separate giving account that you were talking about. It's like you have to create space. But then when you have that space there, God can do all kinds of crazy things. Like you're giving him free reign over so much of your time, talent, treasure, finances, all of it. And it's almost hard to not have some kind of crazy story come from that.
Yeah, and Scripture says, 1 Timothy 6:10, godliness with contentment is great gain. It doesn't say more stuff is great gain or more money or bigger bank accounts. It says godliness with contentment is great gain. And when I preach, I always like to say, you cannot buy your way to contentment. It's impossible to do that. Contentment doesn't come from getting everything you want. It comes from being thankful for everything you already have and sharing it. That's where true contentment comes from. And when you really do set some limits or some intentional boundaries, there's a lot of freedom in that approach to living life. Another little side story here. We had a rental property that we had for a number of years. We did VRBO and Airbnb. And we just got to the point we just didn't really want to do that anymore. And as we prayed about it and thought about it, we could have just taken that money and taken it all for ourselves. And we just said, you know what? Let's just put the whole property into our donor advised fund. And then that just gives us more money to give with. It's going to help with capital gains taxes and income taxes and our cash flow. So we just put the whole, there's a 5-bedroom, 4-bath house and put it in there, and then it got sold. And we've been using that money for a number of years now. And again, it's back to there's joy in that journey because we always have resources to give. God, puts on our heart what's important and where we should give. But we have our Chase Bank giving account, but we also have our donor advice fund. And our needs are met in life. So we don't have needs. Our needs are met. But there's a lot of joy and generosity because we have these two places where there's funds set aside.
So I'm curious, you have the unique perspective of having really been there for a lot of this modern generosity movement, that Larry Burkett being, one of the early ones as well. Certainly instrumental in your life. I would love to hear your version of how you have seen the generosity movement grow, expand, and from just kind of a big picture view, what you see God preparing and doing over these last 30 plus years.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I was the president of the Christian Stewardship Association in the 1990s and, had a conference and all of that. And it was all about fundraising, right? It's all about raising funds. And in my tenure of leading that work at that time, we really said, no, this is really it's not about fundraising. It's about faith raising. It's not about just meeting the budget. It's about the Bible. So we really took CSA down a path. Yes, we're going to have fundraising training, but we're really going to lean into the biblical messaging and the call of God for people to become generous. So in the 90s, you had a handful of financial ministries that were really doing some great work. But in the 90s, you had Ron Blue, you had Larry Burkett, you had Christian Stewardship Association, you had some things happening. And what's happened over these 30 years is the number of groups and people carrying the generosity torch and spreading the joy of generosity across the globe is what is just exponentially increased. I just made some notes to myself here before the talk. You have Generous Giving, Generosity Path, you have Generous Church, you have Finish Line Pledge, you have Global Generosity Network, you have Kingdom Advisors, Faith-Driven Entrepreneurs and Investors, Christian Economic Forum, National Christian Foundation, TrustBridge Global, Crown Financial Ministries, Compass, and many others. So you just have had this incredible growth of spreading the message of generosity. And it wasn't about the fundraising. It really became about the message. And that's what's been beautiful, really the why, not so much the where, but the why. And it's been a joy to be just kind of in that journey with so many other great people that I've, known over the years.
So Brian, can you share some stories of when you felt called to become a pastor, of how you have recognized and obeyed God's voice in your life?
I want to go back to a particular memory I have with Ron Blue. When I felt God calling me to be a pastor, I couldn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I did not go to seminary. You can lose your faith in seminary, right? Some people call it cemetery. But I had never gone to seminary. And I had preached a lot, but I was like, why would someone choose me to be their pastor? My resume made no sense to become a pastor. And I was talking to Ron Blue about it at a dinner one night. And Ron said to me, he said, Brian, the problem here is you're trying to figure out how God's going to work. I'm like, yeah, I kind of am. He goes, you can't. He said, all you can do is surrender. All you can do is surrender. And one of the things that really was important for me at that point was realizing I have one goal in life, only one goal. And that goal is to someday hear, well done, the good and faithful servant. Come and share in your master's happiness, right? So if that becomes your goal, and so at 44, 45, after and I was talking to Ron, I was like, well, Ron, I only have one goal, and that's to hear, well done. Then he says, Brian, then you just need to surrender to the possibility God can make you a pastor. And I literally went up from that dinner. It was in Denver, in my hotel room. I got down on my knees by the side of the bed, and I said, okay, God, whatever you want. That's it. And then the Lord literally miraculously, over several months, caused me to be invited to become a pastor. And only God could have done that. But it was because I knew what the goal was. My goal was to hear one thing, well done, my good and faithful servant. So that's one thing. Then in more recent years in Africa, we do a lot of work in Africa, and we're known as Donkeys for Christ. There's a long story on why my wife and I are known as Donkeys for Christ. But what I tell people is we get up every day and we serve the master. Whatever the master wants us to do, that's what we do. And there's no other goal but to please the master. And, where he wants us to go, we'll go. What he wants us to do, we'll do. What he wants us to give, we'll give. What he wants us to suffer, we'll suffer. And every day we'll look to him to be our provider. But everything in our life, all the honor, glory, and credit goes to him. So we've actually made in Africa Donkey for Christ pledge cards, and thousands of people, children, students, college students, professors, teachers, business people, mayors, bishops, pastors have taken the Donkey for Christ pledge and signed a card. And it's just about living for the Lord Jesus. He's our master. So that's a very joyful way to live, to just say, Lord, it's all about you. And there's one goal, and that's to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Although in my case, I think you should say, well done, thou good and faithful donkey. So.
Yeah, I love that imagery. I think that just captures a lot all in one short statement. But you're 100% right. And I've actually thought about this, if you just for 1 second try to picture yourself doing God's job and, keeping all the economic forces, the environmental forces, all of the different things that interact with each other, and just trying to have the world not completely implode in all the interconnectedness. And then you're trying to work through individual Christians, through communities and things like that. There's no way that any one of them can understand why you would have them do this or that with all that you know and are trying to hold in order. And really the degree to which you can use somebody is the degree to which they're just say, all right, whatever you say, because I don't understand the whole picture, but as long as you got it and I know you're telling me this, that's somebody you can really use. And in a sense, the less they need to know about the plan in order to say yes, the more you can use them. So thinking it through like that just really helped me to start to step into some of the framework that you're talking about, which obviously has had huge fruit in your life. But when you can just be like, all right, I don't need to know the plan. As long as I'm pretty sure this is coming from you, I'm just going to go with it and we'll see what happens. And hopefully the world doesn't implode in the next couple hours.
I like to say God's will, God's bill.
Yeah,
Lord,
right,
Lord,
yeah.
if it's your will, then it's your resources. If it's your vision, then it's up to you for your provision. Where you guide, you have to provide and protect. Just this week, I had some things that kind of imploded a little bit on some things we're doing in Africa. And I was like, okay, Lord, well, what's next? We've been working for 6 months for something to happen, and now it's not going to happen. And you know what? I don't have to own that. I just have to own saying, okay, Lord, what's next? Because what I thought was going to happen is not going to happen now. I think it's going to happen later, but it's not now. But there is freedom in that because you really are walking in dependence on the Lord. I like to use the word faith as an acronym, FAITH, fantastic adventures in trusting Him, right? Faith, fantastic adventures in trusting Him. So as we walk this faith walk life, there's this trust that's always has to be in play because it is an adventure and it is about trusting, and God's going to do what the Lord wants to do. He's the owner and loaner of all things. So ultimately, we just have to stay close to him and walk with him. So again, like this week with some things that, didn't go the way I thought they would be going. We're like, okay, Lord, what's next?
Brian, can you share about the work that you and your wife are doing in Africa these days? How did you get involved, and what does it mean to be a donkey for Christ?
Yeah. Well, my first wife went to heaven in 2010, and I had an African friend. He contacted me after she died, and he was very close to us. He said, hey, I've got a Christian school. We have young girls that need a dormitory at the school. We'd love to build something. Can we call it the Sandy House in memory of your wife? And I said, well, absolutely. That'd be wonderful, and honor her life and her legacy. That was beautiful. So I called him 6 months later and I said, so how's the building coming? He goes, oh, we don't have any money, but someday we hope to build the dormitory. So I said, well, why don't I come over and see what you got going on? And I took my teenage son and we went over there, and they had a school, 600 kids, and they had great ministry they were doing. And he showed me the land where they wanted to build it. And we held hands and prayed and said, Lord, as you provide, we want to put a 124-bed dormitory on this plot of land at this Christian school. And we thought it'd take several years. But when I came back to the States, I don't remember, within 2, 3, 4 months, we had a couple $100,000. Family and friends just rose up and all the money came. And so we built it. So it took a year to build, but then about another year later, I was able to marry another wonderful woman. And she was also widowed. But Mary Ellen had a real love for Africa. So she started going to Africa with me to the Sandy House. And we would see the kids and the girls and their families. And we would just visit them in their homes. And we discovered the suffering that the average African family has. They have no clean water. I mean, there was literally no clean water. They had no electricity, no lights, or intermittent light and electricity. They cooked over horrible conditions, women cooking over basically a campfire in an enclosed space with little children around her. Horrible. A lot of them couldn't grow enough food to feed themselves and didn't have money to buy food. And my wife and I would just pray and seek the Lord. And every year for several years, we kept finding solutions. So we found water filters to solve the problem of the dirty water. We found the world's very best solar lamp to completely take away the candles and the kerosene lamps and replace it with a safe, bright, clean light every night. We found an amazing little cook stove which requires 80% less wood or charcoal and basically no smoke. So it completely changes a woman's life. And then we found out about farming God's way, which is a way you can teach someone to farm and they'll triple their crops and they'll spend 50% less time. So we literally found these solutions, and we started a new organization called Healthy Charity. So we have the Sandy House, that's for sponsoring girls in the dormitory. And then we started Healthy Charity with the world's very best and most affordable poverty solutions, right? So we have over 100,000 people so far with one or more of those solutions. So we've done that. But then last year I was challenged, Brian, you're not preaching the gospel. You're helping people, but, you're not preaching the word, not preaching Christ. You're not making altar calls and all of that. And I took that challenge to heart. And this last year we did gospel light events in Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, and we worked with ministries on the ground there, and we helped over 5,000 families, and everyone got the gift of a solar lamp, and they could buy subsidized water filters or cook stoves or get access to farming God's way. And we used the solar lamp to explain the gospel. Your life without Christ is like a kerosene lamp. You're trying to shine, but you can't. And your life is suffering and toxic and dangerous and costly. But when you become a Christian, Jesus makes you a solar lamp. You never go back to your old life of kerosene lamp, stinky living. You now just put yourself in the sun every day, the sun, S-O-N, in word and prayer, and God will recharge you. You take the solar lamp, you put it in the sun, the S-U-N, every day, and it will recharge every day. And then we tell people this is a free gift. You can't buy it. You didn't earn it. You don't deserve it. Someone paid the price so you could have it. And that's what Jesus did. He paid the price so you could have eternal life and forgiveness of sins. And then we take it and we throw it on the ground and I stomp on it. People get all shook up when I do that. You're breaking it. And I'm like, no. and I pick it up after I've stomped on it, and I hold it up. I said, you know what, look at it, it's still perfect. And even in the tough times, Jesus can make you shine. No matter what you go through, the pressure you go through, you can shine. And we did that. And I've been sharing this now with ministries and churches around the country. And the goal is that gospel light events could be replicated by ministries all over the world. Churches, donors, ministries that are helping the poor already. They could do their own gospel light events. I have the ability to ship solar lamps anywhere in the world. So they just order them, pay for them, and we literally ship across the globe. And all over the world, people can have their own gospel light events. And what's fascinating is I was just recently with the biggest ministries across the globe, and I shared this, and no one had ever heard of this. No one had ever heard of a solar lamp being used to explain the gospel. And yet they said, this is so powerful. And then just real quickly, one last thing is the financial impact is huge. So from a giver's perspective, a $10 solar lamp becomes a $500 impact on that family. They'll save an average of $2 a week for 5 years. So you give the gift of a solar lamp and the gospel message, and they go home and they have clean, safe, bright, safe light every night, but it saves them $2 a week. And if you only make $10 a week, saving $2 is a big deal. So it becomes a 50-fold exponential impact. Your $10 becomes 500. Your 1,000 becomes 50,000. You just do the math on it. So these kinds of products are very transformational for living and people's finances and their health and their faith. So that's kind of what we're doing these days, and we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I can see why. Tell us a little bit more about what some of the partnership has looked like, because that's one of the themes I think I've really seen in the last couple of years as we've talked to some different ministries, is that to the degree to which we're, bring the strengths of different organizations together, that the impact is really magnified. What's been your experience? I know you kind of mentioned that a little bit.
Yeah. So like, for example, we're going to keep doing our healthy charity work in Uganda. So that's something we do when we raise funds for that, which is great. But the gospel light idea in those events, that is to be franchised out or shared with ministries, and they can do their own. So I have a desire to see millions of families get solar lamps at gospel light events and get the gospel, but I can't physically do that. But if I partner with Compassion and Samaritan's Purse and World Relief or a foundation or some donor that says, hey, we care about kids in Kenya or South Africa or Tibet or Vietnam, and they say, we want those solar lamps or water filters for the people we serve. So they can just work with us and we can get that product delivered anywhere in the world. So it's all about kingdom partnerships for the glory of God. So some people have the ability to fund. Some people have a solution or a product, which we have. And then there's the ministry that's on the ground doing the work with the people. You put those three together and it's beautiful because suddenly the gospel gets advanced, lives get transformed. It's very, very significant.
So Brian, you've been at this for 40 plus years. You've seen all kinds of just incredible stories. You've gotten to see God work through you, through so many others. How do you maintain your focus in a specific direction for the long haul? And what advice do you have for someone who might be growing tired in their work?
Well, one thing is there's a secret to the victorious Christian life. It's called a Sunday afternoon nap. I've done it for over 40 years. So if you're tired, take a nap.
That's some of the best advice I think we've ever heard on the podcast. I love that.
Yeah. So this is true. I mean, I am a donkey for Christ, so I work hard, but I have Sabbath for over 40 years. So even when I was a pastor, I Sabbathed on Monday. So in the rest of my, life, when I wasn't a pastor, I was Sabbath on Sunday. And that Sabbath includes, I literally will nap, usually often an hour and a half, 2 hours on Sunday, and it literally recharges me for the next week. So that's one thing I've done. Another thing I've done is I've literally had 6 sabbaticals in my life. Starting at the age of 28, every 7 years, I've done a sabbatical season. Every one of them looked a little different, but it was time to get off the rat race, get away from the pressure, all of the to-do list, and just have a season of rest, renewal, recreation, refreshment, refocusing, reprioritizing. And God has used those sabbatical seasons every 7 years to really renew me and recharge me for the next 7 year, the next 6 year run. And then the other thing that's been true in my life, I literally for over 40 years, I've spent time in the Word in the morning and at night. So when I wake up, there's time in the Word and prayer. This season of my life, I do it with my wife. And then at night before we go to sleep, we're again in prayer and in the Word. It's just part of the pattern of life and our dependence on the Lord to be a faithful donkey for Christ. Got to stay connected to the Master. So we do that in the morning and in the evening. So those are big takeaways in my life. The Sunday afternoon nap, the sabbatical seasons, the time in Word and prayer every day, they really, really sustained me.
Yeah, that is some great advice. And I think if anybody implemented just those couple of things, it'd be obviously the fruit that would come from that. Yeah. Not easy to do, though. Easy to plan to do and then to not do.
Well, the thing I would say on that is most people say, well, that's impossible. But the first sabbatical was Deuteronomy says when he gets married, a man shall not be sent out to war, no duty shall be laid upon him, but he shall stay at home and cheer up the wife he's taken. So God had a 1-year honeymoon plan in the Bible. And I literally prayed for a free house to live. God, give me a free house to live in, and then I can go do that. Because I go off to work to pay for the house I live in, right? And God provided a free house for 1 whole year. And we lived in the northern Wisconsin near a Christian camp. And then all of those sabbaticals, all 6 of them, they've all been a little different, but God provided. So it's been amazing on how that all worked out. But I've never regretted ever taking those sabbaticals. And my life has been, by God's grace, very productive over the years.
Well, on that note, I'm interested for, in this season, what you're most excited about coming down the line over the next 5 or 10 years.
I tell people lately my inspiration is Colonel Sanders. Okay. He sold his restaurant and retired at the age of 65. With his first $105 Social Security check, he decided to take his 40 years of making finger-licking good chicken with his 11 secret herbs and spices and franchise it to others, right? He started that at 65. Today, I looked it up before our call today. Today, there are 30,000 KFC franchises in 150 countries serving 10 million customers every day, all right? And he started at 65. So what I want to do with my next 5, 10 years is I want to take what I've learned in the 40 years of finger-licking good generosity ministry, and I want to take my 7 secret generosity pledge herbs and spices in my Bible devotionals and freely franchise them to churches, ministries, and conferences all over the world. So that's one goal I have. And my thinking, like with the generosity pledge, billionaires anywhere can do the giving pledge, right? But I believe millions of Christians everywhere should do the generosity pledge. It's just saying yes to God, yes to what he wants for your life and how he wants to use you. But the other thing I really want to do is I want to franchise the Gospel Light events, through generous givers and churches and ministries around the world so they can fund their own Gospel Light events with the world's best and most affordable solutions to help lift people out of spiritual, physical, and financial poverty and darkness. So I want to be a Christian Colonel Sanders in the generosity movement. And the next 5, 10, 20 years, if God gives me those years, that I'm somehow part of something global and it's exciting and people are buying in and it's happening. So those are my dreams for the future right now, as long as the Lord gives health and strength. But I always tell my wife we're one doctor visit away from life changing forever. That can happen. You go to the doctor and suddenly he says you have this, you have that, and everything that's normal is no longer normal. But as long as the Lord gives us health and strength, we want to be a faithful donkey for Christ. And I want to still live for that, well done, good and faithful servant goal, and someday go into the arms of my Savior.
Well, it seems that God has been preparing you for that for some time, and we can't wait to see it unfold.
Thanks.
Well, Brian, as we wrap up our time here, I want to leave some space for our manager's minute, and that's how we end every episode. just with a practical action that our listeners can take to step into their role as stewards and to manage God's wealth wisely. So, Brian, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
Yeah, I think the number one thing to do is go to Generosity Pledge, go to that website, and then get the devotional. There's 2 different devotionals, the 30 and 40 day. Use that for yourself, or if you're married as a couple, or if you have family, you can do it with kids. Like the 40-day devotional is just 10 Bible verses a day for 40 days. So there's a biblical principle like God is the owner of everything, 10 Bible verses. God's the provider of everything in your life, 10 Bible verses. And it's very easy to do. And there's an app version. So there's even some audio teaching on that. But just as a person, couple, or family, go through that. And here's what I'll guarantee you. If you go through 400 scriptures over several weeks, your life will never be the same. You know, the Bible is the Bible, basic instructions before leaving earth, right? Basic instructions before leaving earth. God's word is what's going to guide you, grow you into your generosity journey. So you have to connect that journey to the word of God. Not to a budget, not to a fundraising campaign, but to your own faith journey, your own generosity story, and the scriptures that are going to shape your life and change your life. So that'd be an easy thing that anybody can do, and it's free. Again, generositypledge.org, or just go to your app store and put in the word give with joy, one word. Give with joy, one word, and you'll see the 40G life, and you can download it and start using it.
Well, Brian, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for just your obedient faithfulness over the course of your life, and for joining us today to share just some of your experiences that you've had throughout.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate what you're doing, and so privileged to partner with you. Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 126. Before we wrap up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the millions of ways you can use the margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.